A once great city, Detroit, lies in ruins. 50,000 feral dogs roam the city. Abandoned houses litter the landscape. It is a bleak and forlorn future that awaits Detroit. Creditors clamor for nearly $20 billion in debt. City employees wonder if they'll be paid. There's not enough money to even replace the street lights in Detroit. God forbid that a major fire break out. At some level, I think the president does care about Detroit, but today, all I can see is the billions of dollars, the billions of American tax dollars that he chooses to send overseas. I see the shiny new technology, America's best, going to arm people who are indifferent to us and at worst hate us. The president sends billions of dollars to Egypt in the form of advanced fighter planes and tanks. Meanwhile, Detroit crumbles. Chicago is a war zone. More people will die in Chicago this year than in Afghanistan. Yet the president insists on building a $34 million fort in Afghanistan. Hillary Clinton insists on spending $80 million on a consulate in Afghanistan that will never be used. As Detroit decays, Chicago's a maelstrom of violence, and yet no one questions sending billions of your dollars to Egypt, to despots, to dictators in foreign countries. Our nation's bridges are crumbling, and few politicians from either party will question that billions of dollars are being sent overseas while our nation's infrastructure is crumbling. The law is very clear. Everyone here in Congress can read. They recognize that the law says when there's a military coup, the aid must end. Today we will vote on whether or not they will obey the law or whether they will openly flout the law and disobey. When a military coup overturns a democratically elected government, all military aid must end. That's the law. There is no presidential waiver. The law states unequivocally that the aid must end. So when the military coup occurred in Egypt, how did the president respond? How did Congress respond? The president and his cohorts in Congress responded by shoveling good money after bad into the failed state of Egypt. The president is intent on building nations abroad and not taking care of our nation here at home. I propose that we take the $1 billion that is now being illegally given to Egypt and spend it at home. We have bridges crumbling at home. Can't we fix some of our problems at home? We've had a bridge collapse this year in Washington State. We had one collapse in Minnesota a few years ago. We have a bridge in northern Kentucky that is becoming increasingly unsafe, and yet there is not enough money to repair our bridges because your politicians are sending the money overseas. It's unwise, and right now it's illegal. Countries like Egypt are getting billions of dollars in aid. Meanwhile, they recently let a mob advance on our embassy, climb atop our embassy, and burn our flag. I say not one penny more to these countries that allow mobs to burn our flag. In between cashing our checks, Egypt finds time to convict 16 Americans on trumped-up political charges. Fortunately, the Americans were able to escape. They left the country, or we'd have 16 Americans imprisoned by Egypt. Luckily, these Americans were able to get out of the country. Now, how do these establishment politicians respond? How will the other side respond today when they get up and plead that we should break the law? What will they say about Detroit? What will they say about Chicago? What will they say about the bridges in northern Kentucky that won't be built because we're sending the money to countries that are burning our flag? I think it's unwise to send arms, particularly advanced arms, into the chaos of Egypt. I fear one day that someone may arise in Egypt who says, let's attack Israel with these planes. Let's attack Israel with these tanks. I fear these weapons that we are giving to Egypt may someday be used against America and our allies. Even the Egyptians don't want our aid. There was a Gallup poll last year that showed that 70% of Egyptians don't even want the money we're sending them. To understand why, you have to understand that American aid doesn't go to the Egyptian people. It goes to the despots and the dictators that run the place. You have to realize that when protesters gather in Cairo, when by the hundreds of thousands and even millions they gather in Tahrir Square, why are they unhappy with America? They're unhappy with America because they're being sprayed with tear gas, bought with American tax dollars, manufactured in Pennsylvania, and given to the Mubarak family or given to the military. Why are they unhappy? Foreign aid doesn't go to foreign people. It goes to foreign despots and foreign dictators. Foreign aid is more likely to buy a lavish chateau in Paris than it is to buy bread in Egypt. You send money to Egypt, it buys private jets for the Mubarak family to fly to Europe. The Mubarak family is said to have stolen billions of dollars of American aid. Over the past 30 years, Americans have been forced to finance the Mubarak family living large. So when you see pictures of depression in Detroit, when you see abandoned housing in Detroit, when you see boarded up housing, when you see 50,000 feral dogs running through the streets of Detroit, when you see a once great country, a once great nation, a once great city lying in decay, you think about your politicians who chose to send that money to Egypt and not keep it here at home. As Detroit decays, as the money is stolen and squandered around the world, but as Detroit decays, as Chicago's overrun with violence, as Americans struggle to put food on the table, Mubarak and his family dined on caviar and champagne. As Mubarak flew to Europe for weekends on his jet and lived the life of a king, his people rotted in jail indefinitely, without charge, without trial. They've been living under martial law for 30 years. You wonder why they're unhappy with us? We've been financing the guy that's been giving them martial law and indefinite detention without trial for 30 years. To add insult to injury, when they protest against their government, they're doused with tear gas made in our country. Foreign aid doesn't go to foreign people. It goes to despots and dictators. The president claims that he feels your pain. The president says he can feel the pain and he wants to help the middle class. But it seems like he wants and intends to help foreign people, foreign countries, more than he wants to help America. The president promised us hope and change. But the more he claims that things change, I think the more they stay the same. I wanted to believe that the president would be different. I wanted to believe that he would bring change. I wanted to believe that he would stand up to the arms race, to the military-industrial complex, that he would stop the flow of arms to despots and dictators across the planet. But hope and change just turned out to be a slogan. In Detroit and Chicago and in the once great cities of America, no change came. Hope and change was just a slogan. The poverty, the murders, the abysmal schools, they continued. Where are you, Mr. President? Where are you when in our hour of need in our country, why are you sending our money to people who hate us? Why are you sending arms to countries that don't like us or our allies? Why would we do that? The president maintains he will end the war in Afghanistan, and I support him. But he insists on fighting new wars secretly without congressional approval in Libya and Syria. While Detroit decays and descends into bankruptcy, the president, like so many Republicans before him, continues to send American tax dollars overseas to countries that persecute and kill Christians. Hope and change. I guess it was just a slogan. The law clearly states that when you have a military coup overturning an elected government, the military aid must end. Even the president doesn't dispute the law. He doesn't even dispute it's a coup. But he just says, I'm not gonna say it's not a coup or a coup. You can't make me. It's ridiculous that any intelligent person in our country, and I wonder if any from the other side will stand up and say it's not a coup. How do you say when the military takes over a country and boots out a government that it's not a coup? Only a fool or a demagogue would attempt to argue that the military junta in Egypt is not a coup, that the military takeover that actually installed the lead general as deputy prime minister is somehow not a coup.
Would the senator yield for a unanimous consent request?
Not yet. In a remarkable bit of sophistry, the president admits that the law does not mandate an end to military aid when a coup takes place. He says it does, but he says it can't make him decide. So he's not going to decide whether there was a coup or not. What it is it's brazen and open flouting of the law. The president's argument reminds me of a third grader at recess. A third grader says, he won't call it a coup and you can't make him. It's absurd. We passed a law. It's the law of the land says if a coup happens, if the military takes over or participates in a substantial way in removing an elected government, that the military aid ends. So we're either a nation of laws or we're not. So when the president refuses to acknowledge that it's a coup, that it's not yet an acknowledged coup, he just says the aid's going to go on indefinitely. He will go on indefinitely flouting the law. Americans should be outraged and insulted by such blatant shirking of the law. Either we're a nation of laws or we're not. Will we obey the law or not? We have the presumption to tell the world how to behave, to criticize Egypt for not obeying the rule of law, all legitimate concerns, and yet the president blithely ignores our own law. If we choose to ignore our own laws, can we with a straight face preach to the rest of the world about the rule of law? I think by openly flouting our own laws, we take away from our ability to lead the world. We take away from our moral authority to show the right way. We always have been. America's always been the leader by example. But how do we lead by example when we're not going to obey our own laws? There really is a question. Are we a monarchy or a republic? Are we to be ruled by caprice? If we pick and choose which laws to obey, what message does that send? I say to all Americans, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, that enough's enough. We aren't going to take it anymore. Call your representatives, tell them enough already. Tell them to take care of our country. Tell them not one penny more to countries that are burning our flag. Mr. President, I suggest that today we do something historic and listen to the American people. The American people don't want good money after bad shoveled and sent overseas. They want to fix some of the problems we have at home. They want to do some nation building here at home. My amendment that I will introduce shortly will give your representatives a chance to vote for this. We're going to say, yes, we will obey the law. We're not sending any more weapons to Egypt, and we're going to take the money, and we're going to build some bridges in our country. We're going to repair some roads. We're going to work on some infrastructure here at home. Everybody seems to say they're for it. In fact, the president has now come out and he says he wants some grand bargain to take some new money and actually work on infrastructure. Mr. President, it's right here. I'm offering it today. Mr. President, I have another amendment that would say all foreign profit can come home at 5%. We take that revenue and we build new bridges. They won't even let me vote on that one. So the president's grand bargain to increase infrastructure spending, I've got it. It's here on the floor. Mr. President, call the leadership of the Senate. Tell them it's on the floor and you support this, that you want infrastructure spending. I have a bill that would do precisely that. This amendment will do a little bit that direction. Take the $1 billion we spend in Egypt and spend it in America. So when you see the pictures on the news of what's going on in Detroit, if you live in Detroit and you're suffering through the bankruptcy of your city, if you see around you the chaos and poverty of Detroit, you look and call the president. You say, Mr. President, why are you sending that money to Egypt? Why are you sending money overseas when our nation is crumbling, our cities are crumbling, our infrastructure is crumbling, our bridges are crumbling, and the president says, I'm just going to send that to Egypt. I'm going to send that overseas. This amendment will give everyone a chance to put their money where their mouth is, to say, do you care about America? Do you care about repairing American infrastructure? Or do you care more about sending money to a dictatorship in Egypt? I think the choice is clear. I think if you ask the American people, 3/4 or more of them, I think maybe nearly 100% of the American people are with me. Let's spend that money at home. Let's don't send that money overseas to people who hate us, to people who burn our flag. Keep it at home. There is a finite amount of money. We can't do everything. We can't fix everything if we have to fix everybody else's problems first. Let's address some of the needs we have here at home. So, Mr. President, I encourage a yes vote to keep the money at home and not to send this overseas, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Madam President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Yield to the Senator from South Carolina, Senator Brown.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thanks, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Madam President, first I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of the senator from Florida. Now's the time to be creative with our assistance to Egypt to try to change things while there's still hope of things changing in a positive direction. I certainly understand why should we be selling F-16s to people who behave this way. The administration has put on hold the 4 F-16s that were due to be delivered to Egypt, trying to find out what's going to happen next. That makes sense to me. But why are we selling weapons to Egypt? Because if we don't, someone else will. I want them to have F-16s and come to our pilot training bases. I want Egyptian officers to come to our military training academies. I want a relationship with the Egyptian military that can be beneficial to our national security interest. I want the people who build F-16s in America to get the business from Egypt, to get some of our money back. If they buy MiGs or Mirages, we lose that. It's not a question if they're going to buy fighter planes, it's a question who they're going to buy them from. And we have every right to withhold sales. We have every right to put them on hold temporarily. But to just sever this relationship now, I think, would be a huge mistake. And in fairness to Senator Paul, he says we would resume aid once they get their act together and move back toward democracy. I think that's something worth noting. That is an understanding on his part that he's looking for an outcome that we can be more supportive of. The difference I have is if we cut off aid now, then I cannot tell you the consequences of what that would mean in terms of moving in the direction we would all like. Unintended consequences to this decision jump out pretty clearly in my mind, and most of them are bad. Is it a coup? Certainly looks like one, certainly sounds like one, but at the end of the day, if we are moving toward democracy and the military steps back and democratically elected leaders take over, I think that's the goal for all of us. I wish we didn't live in a world like we do. I wish things were easier. I wish that the Arab Spring had been more successful. But the one thing I can tell you is that what happens in Egypt really does matter to us. If the largest country in the Arab world, the heart of the Arab world, Egypt, becomes a failed state, I promise you it will affect our national security interests for decades to come. It would be a nightmare for Israel, and it would take the whole region down a path that it would be, at best, chaotic. Can we prevent a failed state in Egypt? I think we can. I don't know for sure what's going to happen, but I do know this. If America doesn't try, if we don't stay engaged and shape history rather than observe it, we will pay a heavy price as a nation. So, part of this amendment takes money that would be going to the Egyptian military and puts it on projects in the United States. I think one's a bridge in Kentucky. And I have no doubt that there's needs for bridges in Kentucky and South Carolina. I'd love to get my port deepened. But to the people of Kentucky and to the people of South Carolina, if we stop the 1% of our budget is $50 billion, that's no small sum. But if you canceled it all out and just left $3 billion for Israel, seems everybody likes that idea. If you just had $3 billion you spent on affecting the world, is that really smart? How much of the debt would be retired if you canceled all foreign aid and brought it back into the United States? Not a whole lot, but here's what I believe would happen. If America withdrew our foreign assistance, a lot of bad things would happen to us. Having a say, having influence in a world that's increasingly dangerous seems to me to be a good idea. And I'm tired of having to resort to the military as the only solution to affect things. The people in Egypt, the government particularly, wants a relationship with us. They have to earn it, as Senator Rubio said. But really, to cut off our relationship with Egypt at this critical time, I think would be extremely ill-advised, and the consequences to the people of Kentucky and South Carolina and every other state in the Union would be significant. So, to my colleagues, when you cast your vote today about pausing, not terminating aid, trying to reconstruct aid, I don't know how that fits in a 30-second soundbite. It's probably easier to explain the no vote than it is the yes vote. But I do know this, that your country would be well served if you decided today to pause and wait to find out what the right answer in Egypt is. I do know this, that if Egypt goes, the entire region blows up. And the biggest fear I have is radical Islamists are closer to getting nuclear weapons and chemical weapons than any time in my lifetime. And if Egypt becomes a failed state, that's one more problem for us to have to deal with rather than focus on the Iranian efforts to march toward a nuclear weapon. So radical Islam has not forgotten about us. The question for us, have we forgotten about radical Islam? And if you want to stop this march in the Mideast of radical Islam getting stronger and stronger and stronger, try to hang on to our relationship with Egypt. Because if it becomes a failed state, the Sinai becomes one of the great safe havens for terrorist groups. And the Egyptian army, to their credit, is involved now with the Sinai. The cataclysmic effect of a failed state in Egypt would be the biggest booster to radical Islam I could think of, and would do a lot of damage to our national security and our best friend in the region, Israel. So, I have a letter here from our APAC. I asked them to comment on this, and they're saying we're writing to express our concerns over the Paul Amendment to the Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill that would eliminate military assistance and sales to Egypt. We do not support cutting off all assistance to Egypt this time, as we believe it would increase the instability in Egypt and undermine important U.S. interests and negatively impact our Israeli ally. As you know, Egypt is the largest Arab state in the Middle East and has played a vital role in advancing key U.S. interests in that region. Citing just two examples, the government of Egypt has maintained the peace with Israel and has taken important steps to address the instability in the Sinai. Events in Egypt are rapidly evolving. We believe that for now, the United States could avoid taking any precipitous actions against Egypt, such as cutting off all assistance. We look forward to continuing to work with you on these critical issues addressed to Senator Menendez and Corker. One final thought. Maybe one day I'll be with Senator Paul saying we have to sever our ties with the Egyptian military and the Egyptian people. Maybe one day I'll come here and co-sponsor your amendment, or maybe come up with one of my own. All I can tell you, if that day ever comes, it will be one of the saddest days of my life, because that means Egypt is gone. And if Egypt is gone, all hell is going to break loose. I yield.
Senator from Arizona.
Could I ask the time situation?
Under the previous order, the senator from Arizona has unlimited time.
Does the senator from Kentucky wish to respond? Madam President, I think it's important in the context of this amendment on the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill that we put into focus what this amendment is really affecting. It is affecting the most important nation in the Arab world, the heart and soul of the Arab world, Egypt. All countries in the Middle East are important. Egypt is the most important. In Egypt today, there are demonstrations, there are scores of people being killed, hundreds being wounded, and this Friday, just 2 days from now, after prayers, there is predictions that there could be even more carnage will take place as a result of the pro-Morsi people taking the streets of Cairo and other cities throughout Egypt. So I think we ought to consider this amendment in the context of what's happening in arguably the most important nation in the Arab world. And should we ask ourselves that at this point, without adequate hearings, without adequate discussion, without input from the administration as well as the oversight responsibilities by the Foreign Relations Committee, the Appropriations Committee, the Armed Services Committee, all of whom chairmen and ranking members are opposed to this amendment. So, first of all, I caution against a rush to judgment on this issue. It requires, frankly, more than an hour equally divided of debate on the floor of the United States Senate. I'd also like to point out that this amendment today is part of a larger debate that's been going on in the Republican Party for well over a century. Prior to World War I, there was the isolationist wing of our party. After World War I in the 30s, there were the America Firsters. After World War II, there was the Eisenhower wing of our party and the Taft wing. And the conflict and debate, and not the conflict, but the debate has gone on for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. This debate and this amendment that is posed by my friend from Kentucky is part of that overall debate as to what the United States of America's role in the world should be. Should we take our money from Egypt and give it to build a bridge in Kentucky? Should we take our foreign aid and cut it to the point where we no longer have influence in these countries throughout the world and spend it on the much needed projects that are the result of a very ailing and still serious recession that we remain in? So I think that the vote today on this amendment has even larger implications than that of whether we should cut off all assistance to Egypt. And by the way, my friends, I don't think it's an accident that AIPAC, our friends there who represent the interests of the State of Israel, have opposed this amendment. Because if there's further upheaval in the Sinai, and if there's a collapse of the rule of law in Egypt, I don't think there's any doubt that the threat to Israel is dramatically increased. I've made it clear, and so has my friend from South Carolina, that it was a coup. It was a coup, and our law calls for that. But that is an implementation of a law that needs to be done in a way that is consultation with the Foreign Relations Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and in fact, all members of the United States Senate. And I think it's important for us to send a message to Egypt that we're not abandoning them, but what we are doing is trying to caution them, to try to modify their behavior, to tell General Assisi that he's got to have an inclusive government, that he has to allow the Muslim Brotherhood to partake in the upcoming elections, that the Muslim Brotherhood, we has to be told that they have to renounce violence. Right now, Egypt is spiraling down into a situation of chaos, which I can promise my colleagues will sooner or later pose a threat to our vital national security interests. The most important nation in the Arab world descending into chaos is going to be a threat to the United States of America. And I urge my colleagues, and I urge my friend from Kentucky with respect, to realize that this amendment would send the wrong message at the wrong time. It may be coincidental, but this Friday is going to be an important day in Egypt. And should we be sending the message that, okay, to the Egyptians, you're on your own, and yes, other countries in the region are contributing enormously to the Egyptians without conditions, but the support or condemnation of the United States of America, the best and freest and still most influential nation in the world, is of vital importance. And at this time, I think it would be a terrific mistake for the United States to send the message to Egypt, you're on your own. So I hope that we understand that it's not about U.S. foreign assistance. It's not about what serves our interests it is about what serves our interests and our values. And this, my friends, is a debate that we need to have over the weeks and months and years ahead, and probably one of the best places to have that debate. But today, I urge my colleagues, no matter how they feel about assistance to Egypt, that we are committed. I urge them to appreciate that we are committed to a long debate on this issue. I have confidence in the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee that we will be addressing this issue seriously, of which the senator from Kentucky is a member and would certainly take part. I urge my colleagues to understand that an amendment on a transportation, housing, and urban development appropriations bill is not the venue. And we need to have this debate, not only about Egypt, but America's role in the world, and I look forward to joining it. But today is not the day to take a step that could have repercussions that over time would damage United States' vital national security interests. I urge my colleagues to vote to table the Paul amendment.
Madam President,
Senator from Kentucky.
this is actually precisely the time that should come up, because on the infrastructure bill that we're looking at, this gives Americans a chance to show the great contrast. Do you want to do nation building overseas, or do you want to do nation building at home? Do you want to spend billions of dollars in Egypt, or would you rather build some roads at home? So I think it provides a perfect contrast. In fact, there couldn't be a better place to have a discussion on this. We always hear a lot of empty thoughts and empty promises. Oh, we'll do this in committee, we'll do this. They don't want this debate. I've been fighting tooth and nail to get immense members of my own party to get this debate, to bring it to the floor, to bring it to the American people. But let's be very clear about what the amendment does. It halts military aid until you have an election. It's just obeying the law. So let's be very clear. Maybe we should do a summary of what their arguments are. This is a summary of their argument. They love sending American money overseas so much that they don't mind breaking the law. I didn't hear one of them here explain how they're going to adhere to the law. The law says military aid ends when there's a coup. The president says you can't make him say that there's a coup. It probably is a coup, but he's never going to say it, and he's never going to adjudicate it. Who's going to adjudicate whether it was a coup or not? This is about temporarily halting aid. Some people rise up and say, oh, we'll be closed out and they'll buy their weapons somewhere else. They don't have any money. We give them the money to buy our weapons. Some have said we want to promote democracy. Well, there's an exemption in this. You can spend as much money as you want on democracy.
Senator, yield for a
promoting.
question.
Not now. So the thing is we have to understand what this is about. We have to understand that this is about a temporary halting of buying weapons. And people say, well, if we don't give them planes, we don't pay them to buy our planes, they'll think we don't like them and they'll go to war with Israel and everything will be so much worse. They have hundreds of F-16s. They have thousands of tanks. I'm precisely worried about them using them against Israel. When there's chaos and blood running in the street, when there's millions of people protesting, you think it's a good time to send more weapons? You think it's a good time to send more weapons when millions of people are in the street? What happens if these weapons are used against Israel? The canard of bringing the letter, it always happens. Someone brings a letter in. I've spoken to many people who love, respect, and have a great deal of admiration for Israel. I admire our relationship and our alliance, and very proud of the fact that we stand together on so many issues. So to bring it up and say, oh, the people who are against this don't care about Israel is just a canard. I think that this precisely continuing to arm an unstable government in Egypt could well be to Israel's harm, and that's precisely why I bring this amendment forward. Also, it needs to be clear for the record that everyone who's come forward to gather to send more of your money overseas, to send good money after bad, every one of them was for sending it to the Muslim Brotherhood. You hear them talking about Islamic jihadists and how they're worried about all this. No, they're not. They were for funding the Islamic jihadists. They were for funding the Muslim Brotherhood just months ago. I've had this vote before. I voted to cut off the aid to the Muslim Brotherhood also. I produced an amendment. They all voted against it then because we're going to do this in a more rational, reasonable pace someday, somewhere, in some fictitious committee. No, we're not. They want the money to continue. It doesn't go to the Egyptian people. It doesn't buy goodwill. It buys ill will. Do you know that what the money is spent on? Tanks. Tanks roll over people in protest. I have no love lost for the Muslim Brotherhood, but they've disappeared them. We're going to be giving money to the military that's disappearing people. No one's heard from the President Morsi. Most people think he was actually elected in a fair election. I don't agree with radical Islam. I don't think he would be a good president for any country. I wouldn't give him any money. But we're going to give money to people who make people disappear? You know, does anybody remember the Soviet Union? These same people stand up and say how bad it is that, you know, the Soviet Union made someone disappear. I'm absolutely with them. I support that. It's terrible. That's what the military in Egypt is doing, making people disappear. Most of the members of the government haven't been seen in days, maybe weeks. We have no idea where they are. And once again, let me be clear, I have no sympathy for them. I didn't want to give them money either. But all of these people who want to fund the military, they all want to fund the Muslim Brotherhood. The only thing consistent about their argument is sending your money to other people. Well, there's a finite amount of money. Detroit lays in ruins. Chicago's full of violence. There are bridges everywhere. And don't let them paint this that I have some special thing in Kentucky. There is no earmark. There's no special money going to Kentucky. This is going into the transportation bill for the whole country. There's actually nothing in here special for Chicago or Detroit. But I pointed out that we have problems at home. I think we should do some nation building here at home. Now, the other side will falsely say, oh, you want isolationism or you want to disengage from the world? Hogwash. I want to be involved. I'm for being involved with Egypt. I'm for trade. I'm for international and global interaction and diplomacy and all of those things. But do you think you're gaining and making the world a better place by sending a few more F-16s and tanks and tear gas to Egypt? You think that's somehow making the world a safer place? No, it's absolutely. You know, if I thought the foreign aid were going to do something good, I might be for it. Mubarak and his family fly on private jets, dine on caviar and champagne. Your money's more likely to buy a chateau in Paris for the Mubarak family than it is to buy bread for the people of Egypt. And they say, oh, well, the Egyptian people won't like us anymore if we don't give them money. 70% of the Egyptian people have said they don't want our money. It doesn't go to them. The people by the millions are rioting in Cairo. By the hundreds of thousands in Tahrir Square, they're not rioting for American aid. They're rioting for us to quit giving aid to the despots that rule them. Mubarak ruled for 30 some odd years. He ruled by martial law. He made people disappear also. You know, what about human rights? What about dignity? What about trials? They just recently, the Muslim Brotherhood, tried 16 Americans in absentia. If they were there, they'd have put them in jail. And yet all of these same people are afraid to take money away. How do you think leverage would best work? How would we have leverage? Maybe if we withheld some aid, we would have leverage. But if you just give them everything they want all the time, anytime, do you think they're going to do something differently? They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different response. We've given the aid for 30 some odd years. We gave a dictator in the Congo, Mobutu, aid for years after years. His wife they called Gucci Mobutu. Why? Because she would take a Louis Vuitton bag full of about $1 million in cash to Paris. She'd spend it on a weekend. Your money, our money, spent on lavish homes. Mobutu had, I think, 7 palaces. I think Mubarak's got 6 or 7 palaces. They steal the money. It doesn't buy goodwill with the people. It actually buys ill will. It actually does completely the opposite of everything they say it does. It does completely the opposite. So there is a disagreement on this. But the one thing there's not a disagreement on, it's against the law. The Republican Party maintains, we're for the rule of law. And we proudly beat our chest all the time and say to Democrats, you don't want the rule of law and the president disobeys the rule of law. Well, guess what? This time, many Democrats and Republicans will flout the rule of law. Because the rule of law says the military aid ends when you have a coup. It doesn't say you can wait around until it's convenient for you and that maybe you can parcel out the aid in different ways. It doesn't say that. It says the military aid ends until there's an election. It's very clear about this. And so what the argument is about here is, do you believe in the rule of law? If you do, there's no question. You have to vote for this amendment. Because this amendment simply restates the law. I'm not even creating the law. I'm just restating the law that the aid ends and it resumes when there's an election. So those who want to say, he's against all aid, don't listen to him, he's against all aid, that's not what this amendment does. This amendment enforces a law that actually every one of these guys, men and women, voted for. They've voted for this law. It's been on the books for 30 some odd years, and the law says that aid ends when you have a military coup. So they're all going to vote to bypass a law they've all supported. Every one of them supported this law. This isn't, some extreme position of no aid. This is a position of temporary halting it. It's their plan. So that it's not convenient now to obey the law that they passed. This is an important debate. It's not about doing things to harm Israel. It's about doing things that actually I think would be beneficial to Israel. It's not about ending all aid. It's about obeying the law. It really shouldn't even about whether aid's good or bad. I think there are a lot of bad things and unintended consequences that come from the aid, but it's not really about that. It's about whether you're going to obey the law or not. So what I would say is think long and hard about this. Some say they're going to do something that's more important than what their people at home want, and that they're very proud they're going to stand against the will of the people. 3/4 of Republicans, 3/4 of Democrats, and 3/4 of independents or higher think that it's a bad idea to be sending good money after bad overseas. We do have problems at home, and this could go towards fixing it. Some will say, it's only 1%. Foreign aid's only 1%. Well, guess what? If you cut 1% of the budget, each year, your budget balances within about 5 years. It's called the penny plan. Many on my side have actually endorsed this plan. So 1% isn't an insignificant amount of money, and it's not working. It's doing the wrong thing. So I urge a yes vote on that, and I retain the remainder of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey has 2 minutes to unanimous consent for 2 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me close. This has been a robust debate, but listening to my friend and colleague from Kentucky, I appreciate his views. I strongly disagree with him, but above all, let's say what it is and what it's not about. This is not about Mubarak and chateaus. Mubarak is gone. The Egyptian people decided that. He's gone. And it's not about Mobutu. It's not about anybody else. You can conflate everything you want to throw it up against the wall. It's a question about whether or not we will continue to pursue our own national interests and national security in Egypt, in the Middle East. This is, in fact, about democracy. It is about the 30 million that were protesting in the streets of Egypt that Senator Paul referred to, but their call is not for us to leave. Their call is for us to engage with them. And as the testimony before the committee by experts in this field said, the one uniting thing among all elements of Egyptian society that we could do is cut off all aid. And that we unite in what? Against us. Now, this is about making sure that we have a stable Middle East. It's not a canard to suggest that Israel's security is at stake here, because when you have hundreds of tunnels in the Sinai being used by extremists to send weapons into Gaza to attack Israel, it is about their security, and I think no one knows better about their security, and the state of Israel itself knows about their security. It is not a canard. It's a fundamental element of whether or not we are going to have an ally that can be safe and secure. It's a fundamental element of whether we're going to have an ability to affect the outcome in Egypt in a way that will create stability and peace. It's a fundamental element of whether we have to send soldiers abroad versus keeping them here at home. Because when there's peace and stability, we ultimately do not have to engage in the world with our military in pursuit of our national interests and security. When terrorists cannot organize in Egypt, we are safer here at home in the United States. So let us not cut off all aid to Egypt in a transportation, housing, and development bill when in fact our vital national interests are at stake. There's plenty of opportunity to help America's cities. I was a mayor. Nobody wants to help America's cities more. You'll get to do that when you vote for the THUD bill if you put your vote up for it. But this is not the way to achieve it.
I'm going to yield for a question.
I happen to yield to the senator from Arizona.
You know, as Ronald Reagan used to say, facts are stubborn things. The senator from Kentucky just said that Egypt has no money. Isn't it a fact that the Gulf countries and the Saudis have just given them $13 billion?
Absolutely. They've made pledges and given money as well.
And again, isn't the question here is whether the senator from Kentucky knows what's better for Israel or Israel knows what's better for Israel? And the fact is that AIPAC and the Israelis are adamantly opposed to this amendment. Isn't that correct?
It is true that they are opposed, and I would assume that Israel, as a sovereign state, knows what its security interests are better than anyone else.
Mr. President. Senator's time has expired. Mr. President. Senator from New Jersey.
I have 12 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that they be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is the status?
Senator from Tennessee.
What is the status of time right now? I know there was, I think we ought to bring this to a close soon.
All time remaining is under control of the senator from Kentucky, and he has 2 minutes.
Mr. President, several points have been made about whether or not we should engage with Egypt. Absolutely, we should. But the Egyptian people don't see it as engagement when the engagement is at the end of a truncheon, when the engagement is tear gas bought with American money sprayed on them. They don't quite understand that as engagement. So buying arms, American tanks, and American tear gas to be used for crowd control isn't exactly what the Egyptian people have in mind as far as engagement. With regard to Israel, there is no unified statement from the nation of Israel saying that they're for this. I've had both private and public discussions with the leaders of Israel, and to tell you the truth, without naming individuals, I can tell you they're not too excited about sending more arms to Egypt. So for someone to come to the floor and say they speak for the nation of Israel, they speak for all people who love Israel in our country, it's just false. There's probably 20 different groups in our country who support the nation of Israel and support them as our ally. I speak to them all the time. I visit with them daily and weekly in our office. So what I can tell you is, if you talk to the people, to the grassroots, and not to the so-called leadership, you'll find a much different story. Because I would promise you, and I would ask and seek to have AIPAC let me speak to their entire crowd, and we'll see whether the crowd likes, at an AIPAC meeting, whether they like sending more weapons to the Muslim Brotherhood or more weapons to Egypt. I think you'll find a resounding no. This amendment's ultimately about the law, and I hope my colleagues will remember that if they vote against their amendment, they're flouting the law, they're voting to disobey the law, they're voting against the rule of law, and they're actually voting against the law they all have voted for.